think that pastors get a lot of criticism. Some people see the success, they see the blessing, but they don't always know what goes into building ministry. So I think this conversation is extremely strategic.
There are things that this call brings to you that none of those things I just mentioned is going to help you with. You're going to need grace. You're going to need God to talk to you to be able to help people on the level that they need to help. What I'm competing with as a pastor is I'm competing with Broadway. The point I'm trying to make is whatever we're going to do, we got to hear from God.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Listen, this is the very first episode of Change Your Life podcast. CLCC, it's a great blessing that we can come today and be in your home or wherever you are. You might be traveling, only listen, don't watch, or you may be doing something, but it's really an honor just to come in your home and have this first episode. Today is exciting because we have the senior pastor, the bishop of CLCC, that is going to be with us today and is going to be sharing with us. And we're delighted and excited just to introduce Pastor Paul B. Mitchell. Welcome, sir.
Good to see you, Pastor Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Blessed to be with you today.
Thank you. So today we're going to be speaking really, and this whole series is going to be about finance and about money, just different aspects of it. Today we're going to be speaking about church and money, which I think is an important subject all across the world because there are different questions I believe people have and different things really. But I just want to begin by looking at your journey and focusing on how it all begun. And, God's richly blessed the ministry and blessed as well your life as well. So just wanted to have a look at it and just ask some questions about your childhood memories and how you grew up and what are some of the things that stand out to you.
Wow. Well, I come from humble beginnings. So I thank God for that. I'm born in the West Indies, wow. Kingston, Jamaica.
Sunshine.
Yeah. Humble beginnings. Wow. Growing up as a kid, a child in Jamaica was very pleasurable. I don't remember any days that were so bad that it affected me in a negative way. Kingston, Jamaica was a beautiful place. When you're a kid, everywhere is beautiful.
Sure.
You have no bills to pay, But yeah, we grew up in Kingston, Jamaica. I would say maybe around 8 years old. And then at 8 years old, my mother, I'm trying to remember, you're taking me all the way back. I'm praying for you. My mother left Kingston to come to the United States. And for the purpose of filing visas for all of her children. And so she moved us to St. Mary's to be with our grandmother for several years.
I've been there. That's like country.
Yeah, very country. Oh, it's country.
Yeah.
And we stayed there for maybe 3 years or so. And then one by one, she was able to get us into the States. Yeah.
So when I was growing up, I wanted to be a football or soccer player. And then I wanted to be a cricketer, and I was different sort of career paths when I was young.
Yeah.
What did you want to be going through schooling and that sort of thing in terms of career-wise?
My mindset was, I've always enjoyed music. So God has gifted me in this area. He's given me some gifts, some talents. And I began to nurture those talents. And I always wanted to be a sound engineer. Yeah.
Wow.
I was intrigued with that. I
Yeah.
said, that's what I wanted to do, And I went after it on some level.
Because you're gifted with sound. You
Yeah, I
hear
am.
very,
Yeah,
very well.
Yeah. God, over the years, trained my ear pretty well. I mean, He's given me the ability to sing and to write and produce and to arrange and play instruments. I don't think there's an instrument around that I don't play. I play the
Really?
guitar. Bishop taught me how to play the bass.
Okay.
I then picked up the guitar in that order.
Yeah.
Then I started playing the drums. And then I started playing the keyboard.
Wow. The Hammond?
The Hammond organ.
Okay,
I played it all.
that as well.
Yeah,
Wow.
all through my life in church. And so God was training me for future endeavors that I knew not of.
Wow.
I didn't know at the moment, but God is strategic.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then you got into your career path. How did that start, and what did you begin as it relates to career?
Well, I eventually ended up in banking, and it was humble because I started out as a collector. So I would call people who didn't pay their credit card bills.
Okay.
I know no Christians do that. It was only unsaved folks I was calling.
Right.
And I would ask them for their payment. And I eventually got promoted. It was interesting because after I did that for maybe about a year, I got promoted to a 60-day collector and then a 90-day collector and then a 120-day collector. And after that, they placed me into management. So at one point, I was managing an entire floor of people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I came through the ranks.
How long a period did that take from collector to management?
I would say around 4 years.
Okay.
Around 4 years. Yeah. Then I got.
That's very quick, actually.
Yeah. It was about 4 years. Well, I was good at collecting the funds.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they moved me to more difficult cases as I went along. Yeah.
What was your strategy in terms of collecting the funds? Was it to relate with the people, understand what they're going through, or was it like the bank needs their money, bring it in?
Yeah. I read a book by Earl Nightingale very early in my life, and one of the things I remember from the book is this: if you can find out what other people need first, what they're going through first, and what they need, they'll be more apt to work with you on what you're trying to get. And I used that mindset, and it worked extremely, extremely well.
Wow,
And I was
that's
able to
powerful.
collect. Yeah.
So you used that, and that helped
Yeah, it did.
that come in.
Yeah.
So then you moved up the ranks in the bank, and where did you go before coming into pastoring, or was it from banking straight into pastoring?
Well, after I left banking, I started working for Bishop, my brother, Bishop Mike Mitchell. I'm giving him a plug here.
Right.
New Life Tabernacle,
New Life.
Brooklyn, New York.
Wonderful.
And I started, it's interesting because I really didn't want to work for the church. I didn't really want to. I'm raised.
Why was that?
I wanted to make my money outside of the church.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
My mindset was I was going to be a singer, songwriter, producer, and I did some of that. I did some writing. I had a contract with EMI. I wrote for J.T. Taylor from Kool and the Gang.
Wow.
I'm on his 1993 album, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, Baby
nice.
I'm Back album. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
So I wrote some songs for him. I was really pursuing, I was taking my talents and I wanted to be a songwriter, producer, and possibly an artist in the R&B field. That's what I wanted to do because I felt like God had given me these gifts, see. And I thought that's where my bread was going to be buttered. But God had other plans. And when Bishop came to me and said, listen, I'd like for you to come on board and be my music person, I told him absolutely not.
Okay.
But we spoke for a while, and then, being as wise as he was and as young as I was, he tricked me.
Okay.
He said, well, I tell you what, Paul, I have a music director now. If he quits on me and leaves me stranded, will you come on board as my brother and help me? I said, well, we're family. I'll help you out. And I'm thinking, he's never going to quit. You're paying him. He's happy.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. And as God would have it, several weeks later, he quit. Several weeks later.
Yeah.
I would say around 6 weeks later, he quit.
Very, very powerful journey onto becoming the senior pastor of CLCC. So from the choir and being at Bishop's Church, you transitioned to becoming the pastor. How was that?
At the time I was with Bishop, the church had grown significantly without me. But once I got there, things took another turn, I believe, musically. And God helped me to do that. He began then to set up daughter works. And it's interesting because the church I actually took over was the very first one. He did 3 daughter churches. And my responsibility as MD was to find the musicians, get the proper equipment into the church, buy the equipment, set it up, and get the proper teams musically into those smaller works. And he appointed and anointed several pastors for those ministries. Over time, I believe my brother Patrick was pastoring one of the daughter works, and Bishop was working on his church now, this big monstrosity he built on Avenue D in Utica in Brooklyn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And once he finished with that project, he wanted Patrick to come back to him, Pastor Patrick to come back to him. So there was a vacancy at Refuge Center, which was the very first daughter church he planted. And Pastor Yaz and I, my wife, we were slated or picked for that particular ministry. Now, I have to admit that is not what I wanted.
Okay.
Because I just didn't want to be a pastor.
Why?
I'm raised in a family of pastors. Yeah. Well, all of my brothers are in ministry. I was the last to get in the door because I ran from it. I wanted to do my music thing and stay focused on that. God had other plans, though. I didn't want to do it because I thought, and I didn't, it's not even a thought, it's true. Pastoring, I saw the stress that pastoring put on my brothers.
And the restrictions as well.
Yeah. You know what? And all of it led to stress. Living in a glass house is challenging.
It is.
I mean, just think about your life right now. If you lived in a glass house where every moment of the day, somebody somewhere is paying attention to you. Yeah. That's stressful. It's hard enough to be a man. To add a spiritual man to it, now you got to pray and fast and talk to God and lead other people and be an example. I saw what it did to my brothers. Now they're anointed, they're called to do it, they're fine. But it didn't come without stress. I saw the stress it put on their marriage, the stress it put on their finances, and the stress it put on their health and their life. And so I told Bishop initially, I said, I'm not interested in that journey. I'll just continue to do the music for you. So again, he tricked me.
Okay.
He said, would you take one of my other daughter churches and would you go to one of my other daughter churches? He had put 2 more in place. He said, I tell you what, why don't you be one of their assistant pastors?
Assistant.
And so I said, that's innocent enough. No stress. I'll just be there and support. But he was setting me up. Over time, I ended up taking the church that became available, my wife and I, and God opened doors for us. And it's interesting because my older brother in Ashburn, Virginia, he pastors a church called Capital Community Church in Ashburn, Virginia. He called me and said, Paul, God is calling you to the ministry. I said, no, Chester, I don't feel called by the Lord to the ministry. He says, God wants to bless you. I said, God has already blessed me. He said, God wants to bless you on another level. And here's what he said to me. You will not be blessed on the level that you should be unless you take what Bishop Mike is offering you. Now, that's my other brother now.
Yeah.
So I thought they got on the phone and started talking.
Right.
And they were setting me up. But it proved to be correct. My wife had a dream that I should be pastoring. She had a dream. And it's interesting because Every time I remember the dream, I remember my dream. The Lord gave her a dream first. And the dream was she saw us both on a hill. No, that was my dream. Her dream was we were on water. We were standing on water. And looking out into the ocean, all she saw was a sea of people in the water, presumably drowning. And she looked to her left and she saw me standing there with a clergy collar. And when she woke up, she said, "God is calling you to the ministry." And I said, "No, I don't feel led to do that." I said, She said, "But I had a dream." I said, "Well, you just had a bad night.
Right.
You're tired." But then sometime after that, I had a dream as well, standing on a hill, and God showed me people that was in a valley, and my wife was next to me. And it kind of confirmed that what I should have been doing, what I should be doing. I was still resistant. And then the last thing that happened that thrust me into ministry is my wife and I were shopping at a supermarket one day. And I'm pushing the grocery cart. And this is a very strange happening. This gentleman comes walking down the aisle. If you saw him, let me describe him to you. He was Jewish. That's what he looks like to me. He had long hair, but he looked as if he might have lived on the street. That's how he was put together.
Sure.
And so he's walking down the aisle. I'm pushing the cart. Now we've stopped. My wife is taking things off the shelves of the supermarket. And when he got to both of us, he turned to me and said, "God's calling you." And he turned his back and walked the same way he came from.
Yeah.
Took nothing off the aisle or nothing off the shelves in the aisle. And he walked all the way down the aisle and he made a left. And that was that.
Amazing.
And that broke my spirit.
Yeah.
And so I started pastoring that church.
And it sort of confirms that pastoring is not necessarily a job. It's really a calling, isn't it? Because, as you said, and this is not something you would have signed up for as a job, because there are more easier jobs out there, not glass ceiling, more attractive in terms of being able to live your life and etc. But when you're called, you're called. And that's really powerful.
It is. It is not a job. Because a job, you have your time before you clock in at 9 in the morning, you're on your own time. And when you clock out at 5, you're back on your own time. This is not that.
Right.
This is being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When the members call and they have a problem, I have to answer that call. And so it's not a job. And I believe, I agree with you, Pastor. If you're not called to do it, it's going to do things to you that you never thought it would, because there's no grace for it. This is a grace job. You need grace for this one. I tell some of the younger pastors that I mentor this way. I talk to them this way, that just because you can preach doesn't mean you're called to pastor, because the two are not the same. You have to ask God, is this where I'm supposed to be? And let Him tell you if this is what He wants you to do. Because ministry is one of the only things that I know of that requires more than money. With money, you can start an investment business, buy a gas station, or buy a laundromat. You can be in business. For ministry, you're going to need a lot more than just money. You're going to need God's anointing to do this, and it makes no difference how well you can preach and philosophize and philosophically deduce and reason scriptures and come out with analytical deductions to critical thinking, and it makes no difference how much conceptualizations we know and ideologies we understand. There are things that this call brings to you that none of those things I just mentioned is going to help you with. You're going to need grace. You're going to need God to talk to you to be able to help people on the level that they need the help. So yes, it's not a job.
And would you? So we know that, as you said, pastoring is not a job; it's really a calling. Is church a business in the traditional sense?
Yes, church is a business. We're in two business. We're in the business of souls, influencing souls to the kingdom. Right? And the kingdom, as you know, is nothing more than God's system, his way of doing things. That's the kingdom of heaven, okay? His kingdom. So our call is to influence souls into the kingdom, teach, train, prepare souls to function and be effective in the kingdom. But it's also a physical, natural business because it generates resources, right? And I think that pastors need to understand that they're not just called, but they are a literal CEO of a corporation, right? And so there are things that we need to understand about that. I think many of us, me included, we make mistakes on the CEO side because we focus more on the call, right? Helping God's people. But we lack understanding of what we should be doing on the other side.
Sure.
Yeah. But it is a business. And it's,
Sure.
and it's twofold, for sure.
Sure. So the pastor's called, and then it's contained in a system or structure that more resembles a business.
100%.
Okay, that's powerful.
Yeah.
So in terms of church and finance, which I think is a really, really important subject, church being a business, it needs to generate revenue, it needs to be financially productive, and it needs to sort of move forward. So what would your advice be? There's pastors watching right now. What would your advice be as it relates to being astute and being clinical in raising revenue and using revenue adequately in order to be productive as a church?
I know of a certainty that every pastor must become proficient at raising capital, revenue for the ministry. But it must be done correctly, ethically. No games. No games. Now, I can't speak for everyone else, but at Changing Lives, the church I'm privileged to pastor, I don't believe in gimmicks. We don't believe in chicken dinners. I think the kingdom needs much more money than a dinner can bring in. We don't believe in trips and markups on trips, and the church keeps the rest.
Sure.
I don't believe in bringing preachers in, pastors in, and paying them $2,000, and I get $1,000 back from. All of this stuff is games. It's not the will of God. It's not the way God wants things done. And one of the things I will say is this clearly on this podcast: God pays attention to a man's heart more than he pays attention to his behavior. Because we could be fasting and praying and laying hands for show, to show people that we're somewhat spiritual. But God pays attention to a man's heart. I believe that if we do it properly, if we go after the resources properly, the way we should, God will bless us. Now, what is the proper way to raise resources at a ministry? Tithes and offerings.
Right.
Tithes and offering is the biblical foundation for any church in America. Tithing is right. It's biblical. It is God's heartbeat financially for the church. Let me say something else. I believe personally in economic evangelism. I don't believe that a church can be as fruitful as it needs to be if it doesn't have the money that it needs. In this culture that we live in, maybe 100 years ago things were different, but today, in the day of media and podcasts and television and radio and media. If you don't have the resources that you need, you cannot be as fruitful, I believe, as you could or you should. So economic evangelism is important. The church has to have money because, number one, we have a mortgage to pay.
Right.
Or if nothing else, we have rent to pay. We have staff to pay, right? Salaries. We cannot function without the necessary resources. How are we going to keep the lights on? How are we going to pay the heating bill? How will we pay the insurance on the building? How will we pay for the upkeep? How will we pay for the different ministries that are going on in the church? Which is very, very important. Because my mindset is this, Pastor, when it comes down to ministry, I'm never competing with the church around the corner.
Right.
No, never. It doesn't make any difference what the size of the ministry is, whether it's larger or smaller. I'm never competing with the local pastors. I'm praying for them. I'm standing with them. I'm encouraging them if they need encouragement, but I'm not competing with them because we're called to different things, right?
Yeah.
Called to different things. To one he gave 5, to one he gave 2, another he gave 1, according to their several abilities. So all of our abilities are not the same. What I'm competing with as a pastor is I'm competing with Broadway.
Wow.
That's what I'm competing with. Now, when the wife and I go to shows, and we like Broadway shows, and when we go to shows, what we enjoy is the excellence. From the moment we pull up at the Broadway theater and we step inside, there's excellence. How the ushers handle us, how they seat us, how the show starts on time, how it's never too loud in the building, never too hot, never too cold, how the actors are always in place, ready, set. They are prepared to go. The order of things, the excellence in how things are done. When I look at Broadway, I'm always thinking about my ministry. Here's what I'm thinking. Everybody that I have encountered since I've walked into this building is on the payroll. Now, in many churches, you can't do that because you don't have the resources. And there's a season for lack. There's a season where you don't have that. But there's another season, if your heart's right, well, God will give you what you need to accomplish the thing that he's placed in your spirit. So if we need money for excellence, God will provide the money because he's a God of capacity. What I need, he will provide. He shall supply all my needs according to his riches and glory. Well, I need to operate in excellence. But how can I operate in excellence when everybody's a volunteer?
Sure. So you're saying key areas need people
You have
who
to have
are
it.
paid,
You
not
have to
just
have it.
all volunteers.
Yeah. Thank God for the volunteers.
Sure, absolutely.
It's a blessing.
Yeah.
But I believe it's a launching pad. I believe once you get to another level, you should use some of the resources that God has blessed you with to see to it that his church runs with as much excellence that's within you. And I made that statement intentionally because the church will never be more than what I am. It's got to be in me, right? So I believe in economic evangelism. If we operate with excellence, people will be drawn to the excellence. Now, I believe, I'm laughing at this because when I talk to some of the younger pastors I'm pastoring, it all baffles, it clogs their heads.
Right.
Right? People, we don't win souls because we're spirited. Many of us believe that the more spirited the church is, the more effective the church is. And there's some argument about that. If it works for them, it works for them. But I believe, this is my own personal opinion, I don't believe that is the apex of effectiveness. I believe that people are drawn to excellence. He that winneth souls is not spiritual.
Wise.
He that winneth souls is wise. The problem with me is in the early days of pastoring, I'm a fisherman, fishing for souls. But I don't have the right bait. I'm feeding the people who are looking for God what I like to eat.
Okay.
You get my point?
I understand. Yeah.
We're fishing for souls. Come on now, Peter. I'm going to make you fishers of men. We're fishers of men. The problem is we don't know what men like to eat. So we give them what we eat.
Not what they want to eat.
Not what they eat. And so once I realized that we need to change what we feed the fish, more fish begin to come into the boat.
Wow. That's powerful.
That's important.
It's very, very powerful. So two questions. What does economic evangelism look like?
Economic evangelism, really, I can sum it up in one word. It should equal excellence.
Okay.
But to go a little further, you have the resources now. God has given you the resources. Now that we have the resources, we have to ask God for grace, not to be greedy, not to be selfish. In other words, I can't be in ministry for what I believe I'm going to get out of it financially. Now, finances are a part of ministry, but that can't be the purpose for the trip. The purpose for the trip, number one, you need to be called to do it because you're going to need grace. Number two, you're going to need help. You're going to need help. Let me explain. At Changing Lives, what I tell my staff is this: don't be spiritual. I don't want my ushers to be spiritual. I don't want my team to be spiritual. What I want you to be is professional. Leave the spirituality to me. I'll bring the spiritual. When I hit the stage, the anointing will flow and God will have his way. But you do the professionalism. Right? And to get people who are qualified, especially musicians, you're going to need some resources because they're not going to play for you for free.
Sure.
Not unless you were raised with them or you know somebody's doing you a favor, which really I don't really like. Because when people are doing the ministry a favor, they're not consistent. I can't count on them. I don't know if they're coming this Sunday or not. But because of economic evangelism, well, if you're on my paid staff, I'm not worried about it. You coming.
Sure. Sure.
Or you're not coming back, or you're never coming again.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
economic evangelism is very, very important. When that is in place, then it puts the excellence that you need in place, which attracts the fish. Because if they go to Broadway, which everyone has experienced Broadway on some level, and you see excellence there, and you come to the church, and there's no excellence there, they're not going to bypass that to do the spiritual thing with you. They're not going to
So
do
the
that.
excellence comes before the spirit.
There it is. We have to get the fish in the boat first.
Right.
Right.
Right. So the excellence is the bait.
There it is. Economic evangelism helps us to be proficient at that. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of
That's
sense.
important. And then we could talk about another layer of ministry, because once we get the fish in the boat, right? The problem with me growing up in the church is I saw so much that was wrong. I know what it's like to travel and do and preach for pastors, a group of pastors, and they ask me, what am I doing wrong? And most of the time I tell them, you're doing almost everything wrong.
Okay.
Let me go back to the boat. We're trying to catch a fish, clean a fish, scale the fish, gut the fish, cook the fish before we even settle down the fish.
Still flapping.
Still flapping. We want to do everything in one Sunday. That's my whole point.
Okay. Right.
We want to get them in the boat, gut them, clean them, cook them, all in one Sunday. That's not how fish operate. I've seen pastors do an altar call. It's an hour and a half, 2 hour service. Then do an hour altar call after that. Keep all of their guests and visitors and members in the church for another hour while they pray people through at the altar. Now, praying people through at the altar sounds spiritual, and it is wonderful. If it happens in that moment, God be praised. But much of the time, it doesn't operate that way. It doesn't work that way. There's a time and a place for everything. Wisdom is profitable to direct, according to Scripture. We have to catch these fish, get them in the boat. This fish has to settle down first before we can ever scale them. One of the ways we get fish to settle down is have the service, do your altar call, get them in the boat, and then dismiss the service.
Sure.
Because you have other fish that are thinking about swimming your way next week. And so I think economic evangelism attracts them, but what we do after that is also very, very important.
We've got pastors watching and also members as well, and we're discussing here, church finance, how it works, the mechanisms of it. I think that pastors get a lot of criticism. Some people see the success, they see the blessing, but they don't always know what goes into building ministry. So I think this conversation is extremely strategic. A church, when it grows and it develops and people are coming and it's filled and packed, there is a time perhaps when to say, okay, enough is enough in terms of buying bigger buildings or doing more or hiring more staff, because obviously that costs more financially. When does a church know when to stop? Because there's a lot of empty buildings around and buildings that are half full, and a lot of churches that have sort of, want to expand, but if you expand wrongly, then what happens is it's very, very costly, because you don't have the resources or the people to finance that expansion. So what is some of the keys, or what is important in sort of analyzing when it's time to sort of take a rest for now and not to keep expanding until, it becomes unprofitable and then the church is in debt?
I think that anytime we take our eyes off of God's direction, we're going to run into that problem. Again, it makes no difference how well we can preach and philosophize. What is all of that is important. It has its place.
Sure.
Yeah, that's important. I think what's more important than all of that is to hear from God. Oftentimes, Pastor, what's happening is this. We are focusing on another man's field. In other words, we're looking across the street at what so-and-so is doing.
Right.
And we become so impressed or enamored by what we see, we think that we have to do the same thing.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
There it is.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, we forget it is not a competition. We're not in competition.
Okay.
To one, he gave 5. Another 2, another 1. According to their several abilities. You have to let God determine what your ability is. And that's very, very important. I've learned over the years that God can give a man instruction to do something. And he does it. And it works for him. Another man comes along and sees what he has done and tries to mimic the same pattern, and it goes to naught. And I've seen this time and time again. Why didn't it work for this person? Why did it work for this person and not that person? I'll tell you why. God didn't tell him what he told him. And I've fallen victim to that as well. I have no illusions. I've not been a perfect pastor. All of us make mistakes as pastors.
Sure.
But we learn from our errors. I learned a long time ago not to pay attention to what other people are doing so much. Yes, learn their wisdom, get insight. There are some things we need to know that are generic. But there's some other things, if you're going to go to the next level in ministry, that you can only get from God. Let me give you an example. We're in the storefront. Okay. We have, I would say active around 60 people.
Sure.
Active. On a good Sunday, we may have 90, maybe. And it took,
At that time.
At that time. It took
Yeah.
a long time to get there, though, because when my wife and I took that small church, we only had around, I think it was 35 people, and half of them were children. So you do the math, you see what we began with.
Right.
After about 1 year, we were up to maybe about 90 people. All right, we changed some things. And I began to look for a bigger building. We were renting a storefront at the time, and I knew in my spirit that we had no curb appeal. I said, Lord, we need our own building so we can function on the level we should. I said, I'm not going after this because I need to keep up with somebody else. This is not a want, this is a need. Curb appeal is important. And so I knew we needed our own space so we can do what we want, right? I started looking around, and I searched out the area for almost, I would say, 8 months. And I remember like it was yesterday, driving through Brooklyn, and the Spirit of the Lord said, make a left here. And I made a left on Pennsylvania, and from Linden. And when I made the left, he said, make a right here. And I made a right. And I drove and drove, and then he said, make a right here. And I turned down the block where the church would be now, where the church is now. And when I drove down the block, I saw this warehouse, big warehouse, freshly being built.
Wow.
Being built. Wasn't complete yet, maybe 80% finished. The exterior was there, but had no real ceiling and no foundation yet. It's on a slab. It was a slab, but not finished. And Spirit of the Lord said, that's the church. I got excited, got out my car, pulled out my cell phone. There was I was going to call, but then I said, no, let me go inside. Talk to the workers. And I asked the workers, I said, who owns the building? They wouldn't talk to me. Finally, after asking for the fourth or fifth time, one of them said, the sign is outside on the front of the building. In other words, don't talk to us.
Call the number.
Consult the sign. There's a number on the sign. And so I pulled out my cell phone. I said, now, God, if you just spoke to me and this is what you want, when I dial this number, I don't want a colleague, I don't want a secretary, I want the person who owns the building. Dial the number, and he answered the phone, the owner. Met with him, sat down with him, and he told me, Reverend, this will never be a church. I said, no, God told me it's going to be the church.
Wow.
He said, Pastor, I'm telling you, it's never, ever going to be a church. I'm building this. This building is going to put my kids through college. I said, listen, your kids are still going to get through college. I prophesied to you. But it won't be with this building. This building's going to be a church. He said, Reverend, it's never going to be a church. I said, it's going to be a church. And we ate breakfast. It was breakfast we met. Had a nice breakfast. We talked, got to know each other a little bit, talked about each other's journey a little bit. And then it ended. We shook hands, and we went our separate ways. Several months passed. Nothing happened. A few months after that, he called me and said, can we meet? I said, sure. Went back down with him. And within 5 minutes, he said, I'll sell you that building. What God did was put him in trouble in Pennsylvania with another building that he owned. And he needed to liquidate this one.
And God knew that would happen.
Oh, he knew that.
When he directed you.
He knew that. But at the time, I didn't know that, and he didn't know that. And so he said, let's do a deal. I want to sell this building. Now, prior to that, he told me he would never sell me the building. In fact, he told me there's a furniture place that came looking for this building. And there was a retail place that came that wanted this building. And you showed me your finances, Reverend, and they both have more money than you. But nevertheless, I told him it would be a church. And so we made the deal and we purchased the building. Now, we purchased the building, right? 70 members. We purchased the building. Now we need roughly $600,000 to renovate. Where are we going to get the money from? Now, the Spirit of the Lord said to me, the money is in the house.
Right.
I said, well, the house is very small, and these are inner city folks, and the majority of them don't have much money. That's what I told the Lord. I don't know if you've ever negotiated with God. Talked to God. I said, God, you don't know what you're talking about. These are some poor folks.
Right.
They don't have no money. I don't know if you know that or not, but let me help you.
Right.
The Lord woke me up one night at around 3 in the morning. No, it was 2:15, and I was praying from 2:15 to about 3 o'clock. And at around 3 o'clock in the morning, two things happened to me. Number one, I can't explain the first happening. It was almost as if it was a dream, but it wasn't. And he said two things to me. He said, no man will stand before you all the days of your life. 3 o'clock in the morning. Second thing he said to me was one word. He said, switch. I said, what does a switch mean? So I prayed for another 15, 20 minutes. I got up, went to bed. Woke up in the morning. My wife had gone to work. And when I got up in the morning, I had the full revelation of what switch was. And I jumped up out of bed with my eyes wide open, grabbed pencil and paper and wrote down everything that the switch meant. Called an emergency meeting with the church. Told me God said this concerning renovating this building. We will not need a loan to do it. He said the money is in the house. Here's what God told me to tell you all. You all of you that own homes, raise your hands. It was about maybe 6 people out of 70 own their own homes. God told me that you all are to mortgage your homes, do a refinance, cash out, however you want to do it, however you can get it, and lend the church the money. Now, God was clear about that. Lend the church the money. I'm talking about hearing from God and not paying attention to other people's fields.
Sure.
Okay. He said, lend the church. God told me to tell you the money's in the house. You're sleeping on the money. Lend the church the money. Refinance it. Equity line of credit. Lend the church the money. I will renovate the building, then refinance the building because it'll be worth a lot more and pay you back.
Wow.
Switch. Strengths for weaknesses. Switch. The way I knew it was God 100% is that nobody questioned it. Nobody kicked against the pricks. Nobody argued about it. The people went out and did exactly what I asked them to do. Brought the resources to the church. I had contracts for them to sign, which they didn't want to sign. Pastor Yaz and I, my wife, we had to make them sign it. I said, no, you're not going to put this kind of money into my care and you don't sign something that this church owes you money.
Sure.
What if I backslide? Because cash is a very funny thing.
Yes, it is.
Cash brings all kinds of thoughts to your head.
Right.
The unrighteous mammon.
Yes.
Because all money has a spirit on it.
That's true.
And it ain't God's spirit. Maybe another time. But I said, sign the contract in case I lose it and get on a flight.
Right.
They ultimately signed the contracts. We got the money. We renovated the building. And 2 years after the renovation, I refinanced the building and gave everybody back certified checks for what they'd given the church. How do we know what we should do? We have to get that from God.
Amen.
If another pastor hears this podcast and says, I'm going to do exactly what Pastor Paul did.
It won't work necessarily.
It won't necessarily work because he didn't get that from God. He got that from me. Now, if he hears my voice today and God speaks to him through this conversation, that's another thing. And he does it because he's hearing God through me, then God will bless him because God is using me to minister to him. The point I'm trying to make is, whatever we're going to do, we got to hear from God.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
That's how you know whether you should do it or not build it. Now that story is true and it's right. But I've been on the other side as well. Because when the church began to grow and we got over 2,000 members, I said to my church, we need a bigger building.
Wow.
And now, see, I'm starting to feel myself.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
We did it once.
Do it again.
We can do it again.
Yeah.
And I'm out looking for places, and we had 5 deals on the table that God refused to let go through. And I'm saying to myself, now this is ridiculous. You did a miracle for us in the first season.
So do it again.
Are you going to tell me you're not going to do it this season?
Yeah.
And God never opened that door because 3 years after we were trying to do it, COVID hit. And God knew COVID was coming.
Yep.
But I didn't know. Just about every day in my quiet time when I talk to God, I thank him for that.
Yeah.
But in that season, I have to admit, I had a little attitude. Now, I know y'all are saved. You never had an attitude, y'all, but you pray my strength.
Yeah.
Pray that pastor gets saved.
Yeah.
But I had a little attitude. It's only in this season when COVID has said, Lord, thank you. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
And you didn't want us to pick up a $70,000 a month mortgage in this season where people are no longer coming to the building. They've relegated themselves to online church.
Light bills and gas bills. And
So the point I'm trying to make is I've been on both sides, and God has gently reminded me, unless he builds the house, we're going to labor in vain. And I'm so thankful that he didn't allow us to build that next facility. Now, maybe at some point in time in the future, God will open the door and say, it's time to build. But unless he comes and says that, unless he says that, unless he prompts that, I have no desire to build another church.
wow.
It makes no difference who's building, though.
Sure.
I can't pay attention to what other people are doing. I've got to fix my eyes on him and get my ears inclined to his voice so I can stay in his will.
Awesome. This has been wonderful. This is our first episode of Change Your Life podcast. Pastor Paul B. Mitchell. This has been fantastic. There's been so many nuggets, and we've learned so much. I want you to do 2 things. Number 1, if you're around the New York area, I want you to join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. The information is on the screen. And also next week, again, we'll be back for episode 2. And I want you to tune in for that. It's going to be powerful and you'll be impacted. And we thank God. Thank you so much, Pastor. And we'll see you next week. Bless you in Jesus' name.
Calling all young people. Join us on Friday, January 10, 2025 for The Revival, a night of worship, testimonies, and a word to start your new year right. We'll be raffling 2 AMC movie tickets and a NutriBullet. So don't forget to buy your raffle tickets beginning Sunday, December 22nd, 2024 at the info desk after morning service. Doors open at 7 p.m. and service starts at 7:30 p.m. Come enjoy the photo booth and get your seats early. Tell a friend because you won't want to miss this, and we'll see you there.
Listen, CLCC, I have some exciting news for you. Change Your Life podcast will be starting every Wednesday in January from 8 p.m. We're going to be discussing life-changing topics that can enrich your spiritual experience and help you in your growth as you move to the next level. We'll have discussions and interviews, as well as innovative, creative, and impacting teaching that's going to be just right for you. So I want you to meet me every Wednesday at 8 p.m. for Change Your Life podcast. Be blessed and favored of God.